this is one of the biggest storylines in boxing. You're coming back. Obviously, you have a book coming out that details, chronicles your entire life in not just the world of boxing, but the world of sports entertainment. Can you talk to us about that journey? Your book, It Happened.
There's the book. Well, there's a postcard facsimile of the cover of the book, to be totally accurate. And it's really what has astonishingly happened on the way to the pathway to the book, because George Foreman very tragically, sadly died a couple of weeks ago. Deep loss for me. He was a really treasured friend. And so the title, It Happened, comes from my call of his win over Michael Moorer. The prologue to the book, which is the first thing that you read, is about the 19-year-old me watching the 19-year-old him win his Olympic gold medal in Mexico City in 1968. The cover blurb that he produced for the book sits on the back of the book, just below John Grisham and above Billie Jean King, was, as far as he or as far as his family can tell, as far as his family and I can tell, that was his last public act. So I feel so deeply and poignantly connected to George now as the book gets ready to come out. It almost feels, totally incongruous that I should be publishing this and telling the story, and now he's gone. But on the other hand, in a way, it was really strikingly fitting that all this happened at the moment when it did.
And again, George Foreman is a force to be reckoned with. Of course, he's recognized with his fight with Muhammad Ali, and that fight ascended Ali to greatest of all time. But George was a great in his own way, with his humbleness, with his treatment of people. Yes, he was a ferocious killer inside that ring, but outside that ring, he was a humble giant.
Well, George underwent a personality transformation in adult life. And it was a self-constructed personality transformation. I had the privilege of watching some of that at close range when he was working with me on HBO's boxing telecast. And I learned about and became familiar with George's extraordinary will, his devotion to constantly improving himself and his relationships with and attitudes toward other human beings, the lessons that he was capable of teaching to other adults about compassionate, responsible, sincere behaviors. He was a great man. He was not just a great fighter. He was a truly great man, but he became a great man through a self-generated learning process throughout his whole adult life. And I did not imagine when he came to work on the HBO boxing telecast that I was going to learn important life lessons from George Foreman. I thought of him at that moment as a clown-like figure who was, cracking jokes and making fun with the public on his way to selling his fights and selling all the other products that he sold. But there was a lot more to it than that. And in my years working with him and being around him, I learned a lot of valuable lessons about human behavior and how to show love and respect for your fellow man. And by the way, a big part of that process for him was getting over his initial predilections about Muhammad Ali, his resentment about the rumble in the jungle, et cetera, and constantly gravitating for the rest of his life toward a more sympathetic, loving, brotherly point of view. And I can honestly say that by the time Ali died, and then later, eventually, by the time George died, George in particular saw them as blood brothers, met under a common watchword. And that was a very beautiful thing for me to witness and learn from in my life.
And of course, you also mentioned the great Muhammad Ali. I've ordered your book. It's going to come for me on the 15th on Kindle, so I'm going to be able to read that via my phone. But without giving too much, we did hear that you were at one of Muhammad Ali's fights. and I believe you were dropped off alone. How was that experience for you, seeing the greatest of all time that early in your life?
The very first live prize fight that I ever saw was Cassius Clay versus Sonny Liston, February 25, 1964, at the Miami Beach Convention Center. I was a teenager living in Miami at the time. I saved lawn mowing and car washing money for months to buy a ticket for the fight. I don't remember whether that ticket was $100 or $150. It had to be something in that range, which was cosmic and outlandish at the time. But I managed to put together all that money and bought the ticket. My mother took me to the Miami Beach Convention Center because I was not 16. I didn't have a driver's license, and she dropped me off. I went in alone and had a pretty decent seat from which to watch the fight. Cassius Clay was my number one hero in life. And at that moment had already been my number one hero in life for about 4 years, because I first discovered him at the 1960 Rome Olympics on CBS's coverage of those Olympic Games, and fell in love with the whole act. The braggadocio, the bombast, the speed, the ballet of it, etc. I loved all those things about Ali, and most of all, I was raised in the South, and my mother was ardently teaching me what we would now call anti-racism, which was, a legitimate appreciation of the rights and contributions of other human beings, regardless of the color of their skin. Who knows how my mother got that in a racist household in Nashville, Tennessee, but somehow that was what she arrived at, and she ardently strove to teach me that attitude as well. And that's part of the path that led me to Cassius Clay, later Muhammad Ali, to that night in Miami Beach. And oh, by the way, do you know the name? Do you know the name Bob Sheridan?
I feel like I've heard of it, Bob Sheridan.
Well, Bob Sheridan, also called the Colonel, um, probably called more fights in his fight calling career than I did, because he was doing sometimes 2, 3, 4 shows a week for Top Rank and other vendors. So if you were looking for somebody in my generation who called more prize fights than I did, Colonel Bob Sheridan was that guy. And that fight, Miami Beach, Cassius Clay versus Sonny Liston, February 29th, 1964, was also his first live prize fight.
Wow.
I learned that very late in his life, and he left us a little while ago. But it's pretty astonishing as a coincidence when you think about it, that the two guys in our generation who called the most prize fights via broadcast for boxing audiences in the United States, me and Bob Sheridan, both saw our first live prize fight the same night in the same building.
Wow.
So,
And another big
Chris,
broadcaster that
Chris, real
had,
quick, I'm gonna interrupt
okay.
you. I have it up on the screen. Bob Sheridan. It says he broadcasts over 10,000 fights on radio and television.
Yeah, I did. Maybe, I don't know, maybe I did 500, or I mean, I'm nowhere near his overall number of fights, because again, he was doing several shows a week sometimes, and I was working for HBO doing, one show a month, or 2 shows a month, something like that. It was a different kind of life. But yeah, again, the coincidence is that we both saw our first live prize fight same night, same place, Miami Beach Convention Center.